Kieran Voss watched the sunset from his small research station window. Orange light danced across the endless blue waters of Nereus IV. This was his 5th year alone on the water planet, and most days he didn't mind the silence. Today was different. Today, the silence felt heavy. He turned back to his work table. Fish samples and data tablets cluttered the surface. His job was simple: study the ocean life and send reports back to Earth every 6 months. No people, no problems, just the way he wanted it after what happened in the military. Time for dinner, he said to himself, a habit from years of talking to no one. The night sky outside suddenly lit up. Kieran rushed to the window. A bright object cut through the darkness, trailing fire and smoke. It wasn't a meteor. It moved too strangely, changing direction before disappearing behind the horizon with a distant boom. A ship. Someone had crashed on his planet. Kieran's heart raced. He hadn't seen another person in years. Part of him wanted to ignore it. Whatever crashed wasn't his problem. But he knew better. "Damn it," he muttered, grabbing his emergency pack and heading to his small submarine. The ocean was calm as he piloted toward the crash site. His radar showed something large 10 kilometers from his station. As he got closer, underwater lights revealed the shape. A spacecraft unlike any he had seen before, its sleek silver hull half submerged in the water. Kieran docked his sub to the ship's airlock. He put on his breathing mask, just in case, and entered. Inside, the air was breathable but filled with smoke. Strange symbols glowed on damaged control panels. The design was nothing like human technology. Kieran moved carefully through the narrow corridors, his old military training returning with each step. He found the pilot in the control room, slumped over the main console. At first glance, she looked almost human, but her skin was blue with shimmering patterns that seemed to glow faintly. She was hurt badly, dark blood seeping from a wound on her head. "Hey," Kieran said, gently touching her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" The alien woman's eyes opened slowly. They were completely silver, with no pupils. She stared at Kieran, and then spoke words he couldn't understand. A small device on her wrist lit up, and suddenly her words made sense. "Human?" she asked, her voice now clear through the translator. "How is there a human here?" "I'm Kieran. This is my research station. You crashed near it," he explained, checking her wounds. "I need to get you back to my medical supplies." "No." She tried to sit up but winced in pain. "My ship." "Your ship isn't going anywhere right now," Kieran said. "But you'll die if I don't treat those wounds." The alien woman studied him, clearly weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. "I am Commander Salice Aura of the Lithirian Scout Fleet," she said with formal dignity despite her condition. "I accept your assistance." Getting her to the submarine was difficult. She was lighter than she looked, but every movement caused her pain. Once inside his research station, Kieran laid her on his examination table and treated her wounds with his limited medical supplies. "How did you end up alone on an unmarked planet?" Sully's asked as he worked. "I like it that way," Kieran replied. "No one to bother me." Silly's tried to smile but grimaced instead. "And yet you came to help a stranger." "Old habits," he said. When he finished, Silly's caught his wrist in a surprisingly strong grip. "You should know," she said, her silver eyes serious. "My people have watched humans for decades. We stay away because of the aggression concern." "The what?" Kieran asked. "Your species' tendency to shoot first," she explained. "And yet, here you are, helping me." Kieran didn't know what to say to that. He simply nodded and went to prepare a place for her to rest, wondering what exactly he had gotten himself into. "Launch sequence complete," Celis announced as her ship rose from the ocean surface. Water cascaded from its silver hull, catching the morning sunlight. Kieran sat in the co-pilot's seat, watching his research station grow smaller below. 5 years of his life, becoming just a tiny dot on the vast blue planet. He had packed only a small bag with personal items. Everything else stayed behind. "Are you okay?" Celis asked. noticing his silence. "Yes," he said, "just strange to leave." The ship accelerated upward through the clouds. Kieran felt the gentle push of gravity as they climbed higher. Soon, the blue sky darkened to black, and stars appeared all around them. Nereus IV became a blue marble below. "We should reach the edge of the system in 2 hours," Sully said, checking her instruments. "The human ships will arrive from that direction." She pointed to a glowing dot on her screen. Suddenly, warning lights flashed across the control panel. The ship shook violently. "What's happening?" Kieran asked, grabbing his seat. Sully's fingers flew across the controls. "Something's targeting us from orbit." On the screen, objects appeared around Nereus, small satellites that hadn't been there before. Red beams of energy shot from them toward the ship. "Precursor defenses," Silis explained, yanking the controls hard. The ship rolled to the side as a beam missed them by meters. The station must have deployed them. More beams fired. Silis steered the ship in a wild pattern, avoiding most hits. But one beam caught the edge of their wing, sending them spinning. "I need to stabilize us," she shouted over alarms. "Can you access the defense systems?" Kieran moved to a side panel where screens showed the attacking satellites. He studied the patterns of the beams, remembering the symbols from the underwater station. "They're following a sequence," he realized. 3 seconds between each firing pattern. "If I can predict it." His fingers worked quickly on the keyboard, inputting commands in the alien language Solis had taught him. As another beam approached, the ship's shields changed frequency. The red energy scattered harmlessly around them. "It worked," Kieran exclaimed. "Not for long," Solis warned. "The shields can't handle many more hits. We need somewhere to hide until I can repair them." She pointed the ship toward Nereus's largest moon, a gray rock with deep craters. They landed in the shadow of a tall mountain, hidden from the satellite's sensors. As Solis worked on repairs, Kieran monitored the space around them. That's when he saw them. New ships entering the system, different from both human and Letherian designs. They moved aggressively, heading straight for Nereus. "Solis," he called, "we have company." She joined him at the screen, her face darkening when she saw the ships. "Vexhar Raiders." The worst possible timing. "Who are they?" Kieran asked. "Scavengers. They hunt for old technology to sell or use as weapons." She pointed to their flight pattern. "They must have detected the precursor signal. If they get that technology." Kieran understood. The precursor weapons were dangerous enough already. In the wrong hands, they could threaten entire worlds. "What about your people? And mine?" he asked. "The Vexhar will attack them too if they interfere." Celes looked grim. "We can't let anyone get that technology." "So what do we do?" Kieran asked. Celes was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she turned to him with determination in her silver eyes. "We go back," she said. "Back to the underwater station. We need to lock it down completely before anyone can access it." "Go back?" "That's crazy," Kieran said. "We just escaped." "I know," she agreed. "But if we don't, the consequences could be terrible for both our worlds." Kieran looked at the screen, at the approaching Vexhar ships, then back at Celes. He nodded slowly. "Then let's be crazy together," he said. Celes smiled, touching his hand briefly. They turned back to the controls, plotting a course that would take them past the orbital defenses, back to the planet Kieran had just left behind. Returning to Nereus was harder than leaving it. Celes flew the ship in a zigzag pattern, using the planet's magnetic field to hide from the orbital defenses. Kieran watched the radar closely, tracking the Vexhar ships that were now entering the atmosphere. "2 of them are heading for the underwater station," he said. "They've found it already." "We need to hurry," Celes replied, pushing the engines harder. They broke through the clouds at high speed, skimming just above the waves. Kieran could see his research station in the distance, still standing undisturbed on its platform. Beyond it, the ocean bubbled where the precursor facility was growing beneath the surface. There, Kiran pointed to dark shapes moving under the water. Vexhar submersibles. Celes nodded. We'll have to go in through a different entrance. I saw another opening on the far side when we explored it. She landed the ship on the water near the hidden entrance. They quickly put on diving gear and slipped into the cold ocean. The water was clearer than normal, glowing slightly with blue light from the active precursor technology below. They swam down, following the growing light. Fish scattered around them, frightened by the strange changes to their home. After 10 minutes of swimming, they found the second entrance, a small opening in the side of the growing structure. Inside, they pulled themselves onto a dry platform. The facility hummed with energy, much more active than before. Corridors that had been dark were now lit with blue and green lights. This way, Celes whispered, drawing her weapon. The control chamber should be deeper inside. They moved carefully through the ancient halls. Twice they had to hide as precursor security drones floated past. Once, they heard voices echoing from a side passage, rough, unfamiliar language that Kiran guessed belonged to the Vexhar raiders. They're searching for the control room too, he whispered. After what felt like hours of sneaking through the maze-like structure, they'd reached a large door covered in glowing symbols. Celes studied them, then pressed a sequence on the wall panel. The door slid open with a soft hiss. The chamber inside was massive, with a ceiling that stretched up into darkness. At its center stood a column of swirling blue energy. Around it, dozens of control stations formed a circle, each displaying different information in the precursor language. This is it, Celes said. The main control hub. Kiran approached one of the stations. How do we lock it down? Celes moved to what looked like the primary console. According to the records I studied, there should be a security protocol, a way to shut everything down in case of emergency. As they worked, searching through the alien systems, Kiran found something unexpected. A star map showing dozens of similar facilities across the galaxy. Celes, look at this, he called. The precursors built these everywhere. But why? She joined him, her eyes widening as she read the symbols. It says these are containment facilities. They were trying to stop something called the divergence. Before she could explain further, a harsh voice spoke from behind them. Don't move, off-worlders. They turned to see 3 figures in the doorway. They looked almost human, but with gray skin and sharp features. Each held a weapon pointed at Kiran and Celes. Vexhar, Celes whispered. The leader stepped forward. Step away from the controls. This technology belongs to us now. You don't understand what you're dealing with, Kiran said. This facility is dangerous. The Vexhar leader laughed. All valuable things are dangerous. That's what makes them worth taking. Celes moved slightly, positioning herself between Kiran and the raiders. We won't let you have it. You have no choice, the leader replied, raising his weapon. What happened next was so fast that Kiran barely saw it. Celes leaped forward, her own weapon firing. 2 of the raiders fell, but the leader's shot hit Celes in the shoulder. She crashed against a control panel, leaving a smear of dark blue blood as she slid to the floor. Celes, Kiran cried, rushing to her side. Around them, the facility suddenly pulsed with red light. An alarm sounded, echoing through the chamber. On every screen, the same symbol flashed over and over. What did you do? The Vexhar leader demanded, looking around in panic. Celes smiled weakly at Kiran. Initiated the lockdown, she whispered. But we need to get out. The system will purge itself. A rushing sound filled the chamber as water began pouring in through vents in the walls. The small asteroid looked like any other rock floating in space, but today it was the most important place in the Nereus system. On its flat surface stood 3 groups, eyeing each other with suspicion. Kiran represented the humans, wearing his old military uniform that felt too tight after 5 years. Celes stood for the Levirians, her blue skin still pale from her injury, but her back straight with pride. The Vexhar had sent 3 representatives, their gray faces unreadable. "Thank you all for coming," Kieran began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "What we found on Nereus affects everyone." He activated a hologram showing the underwater precursor facility. This ancient station was built to contain dangerous technology that destroyed its creators. One of the human officers stepped forward. "Why should we believe you? You abandoned your post." "Because he saved your lives," Celise interrupted. "If anyone had accessed that technology, it would have been catastrophic." A Letherian commander with elaborate silver markings spoke next. "Some in our leadership believe this technology could benefit our people." "That's what the precursors thought too," Kieran replied, "until their creation evolved beyond their control and turned against them." The lead Vexhar made a harsh laughing sound. "Pretty stories. The strong take what they want. We will return with more ships and break the lockdown." Tension filled the air. Hands moved closer to weapons. The meeting was falling apart before it had really begun. Suddenly, a fight broke out. The Vexhar leader pulled out a hidden weapon and aimed at the human officer. Kieran moved without thinking, pushing the officer aside as Celise leaped forward, disarming the Vexhar with a swift move. Standing back to back, human and Letherian working together, they subdued the Vexhar attackers in seconds. The other representatives watched in amazement at how perfectly Kieran and Celise coordinated their actions. When order was restored, something had changed. The human and Letherian leaders looked at each other with new respect. "Perhaps," said the Letherian commander slowly, "there is another approach." Hours later, an agreement was reached. The 3 species would form a joint study group to monitor the precursor facility safely. No one would try to break the lockdown. The Vexhar, under close watch, would be allowed limited participation if they shared their knowledge of other precursor sites. As the meeting ended, the human officer approached Kieran. "The science division would welcome you back, Dr. Voss. Your experience with alien biology, and now this discovery, you'd be valuable." At the same moment, the Letherian commander spoke to Celise. "You are ordered to return home immediately for debriefing." Kieran and Celise looked at each other across the room. 5 weeks ago, they had been strangers. Now, the thought of separation felt wrong. With respect, Celise said to her commander, "I request a new assignment. The Nereus project will need Letherian representation. And I believe," Kieran added to the human officer, "that this project needs someone who understands both species, someone who can bridge our differences." Both leaders considered this for a moment, then nodded their agreement. That evening, Kieran and Celise stood on the observation deck of the human science vessel, watching as a joint team began constructing a monitoring station in orbit around Nereus. "So," Kieran said, "no more crashes, no more secret missions." Celise smiled. "Just diplomacy, science, and making sure ancient technology stays locked away." "Sounds boring," he teased. "I doubt it will be," she replied, her silver eyes reflecting the stars. "Not with you involved." As they prepared to depart for their first official mission together, Celise touched Kieran's hand lightly. "Remember when we first met? I crashed on your world, you repaired my ship, and then I refused to leave without you." Kieran smiled. "And now neither of us wants to leave without the other." "Maybe," Celise said, looking out at the stars. "That's exactly how peace begins between 2 worlds." The ship's engines hummed as they moved away from Nereus, the once lonely planet now the center of something new. The first true collaboration between humans and Letherians, built on trust that began with a crash landing and a decision to help rather than fear the unknown. 3 days passed. Celise recovered quickly. Her blue skin had amazing healing abilities that Kieran had never seen before. She spent most of her time looking out the window at the endless ocean, watching the spot where her ship had crashed. "We should check on your ship," Kieran said one morning while making breakfast. "The water might damage it more." Celise turned to him. "You seem to know about ships." Kiran looked down at his food. I wasn't always a biologist. What were you? She asked. An engineer. Military spacecraft division, he admitted, before I decided to leave it all behind. Celise's silver eyes widened. That is very fortunate for me. Later that day, they took the submarine back to her crashed ship. Inside, water had started to leak through damaged sections. Celise led him to the engine room, where strange blue crystals hummed with energy. This is our drive system, she explained. The crash damaged the main alignment. Without it, the ship cannot fly. Kiran studied the technology. It was nothing like human engines, but he could understand the basic principles. The energy flow is disrupted here, he said, pointing to a twisted section. And these connections are broken. Celise looked surprised. You can read the system. Not the details, but the fundamental concepts are similar. Kiran ran his hand along the damaged parts. I might be able to help repair this. You would do that? Celise asked. What else am I going to do? Count fish all day. Kiran smiled for the first time since she arrived. Over the next week, they worked together on the ship. Kiran brought tools from his station, while Celise taught him about her technology. They developed a rhythm, working side by side in comfortable silence. Why did you leave your military? Celise asked one day as they worked on rewiring a control panel. Kiran's hand stopped moving. There was a mission. It went wrong. People died because I'd followed orders I knew were bad. He didn't look up. After that, I couldn't stay. I requested this assignment because no one else wanted it. Celise placed her blue hand on his. In my culture, questioning bad orders is honored, not punished. It's not always so simple for humans, Kiran replied. As they continued repairs, Kiran noticed how quickly Celise understood his suggestions. She was smart and adapted fast. He enjoyed working with someone who could keep up with his ideas. On the 10th day, they got the communication system partially working. A weak message came through in Celise's language. Her face turned darker blue as she listened. Bad news? Kiran asked. My people are fighting among themselves, she said quietly. Different groups want different things. It's getting worse. Kiran nodded, understanding what it meant to have trouble at home. That evening, as they returned to the research station, Kiran noticed something strange on his sensor screens. He rechecked the data 3 times. Celise, he called her over. The damage to your ship. You said it was from hitting something in space. Yes, she answered. Some kind of anomaly. Kiran showed her the energy readings he had collected. This wasn't natural. These are traces of a directed energy weapon. He looked at her seriously. Someone shot your ship down. Celise's silver eyes met his. For a moment, she seemed about to deny it. Then her shoulders dropped. There are those who don't want me to complete my mission, she admitted, and they might not be finished yet. Kiran looked back at the ocean where her ship lay hidden. His quiet life was definitely over. 2 weeks passed. Kiran and Celise worked day and night on her ship. Now it was almost ready to fly again. The main engine is working, Kiran said, wiping grease from his hands. But the navigation system still needs calibration. Celise nodded, making final adjustments to a control panel. 1 more day, and I can leave. Kiran felt a strange tightness in his chest at her words. He had gotten used to having someone around. The thought of returning to his lonely life didn't feel right anymore. What will you do when you get back? He asked. Report what we found, she replied. The precursor station is too important to ignore. That night, back at the research station, Kiran couldn't sleep. He sat at his communication console, staring at a blinking light he had been ignoring for days. The monthly check-in from Earth was 3 weeks overdue. If he didn't respond soon, they would send someone to investigate. His finger hovered over the reply button. He could tell them everything. About Celise, about the precursor station, about the signal it was sending into space. Or he could say nothing and let them come. The alarm suddenly blared. Celise rushed into the room. What's happening? she asked. Karen pointed to the radar screen. Ships. Entering the system. Letherian ships, Celes confirmed, studying the patterns. They must have received my distress signal. And this, Karen pointed to the blinking light, means human ships will be coming too. I haven't responded to my scheduled check-in. They looked at each other, understanding the problem. Two species who had never met before were about to arrive at the same time, at a planet with awakened alien technology. This could go very badly, Celes said quietly. First contact should be planned, diplomatic. Karen agreed. Not like this. Outside, through the window, they could see lights under the ocean. The precursor station was becoming more active, spreading across the seafloor like a growing city. We need to leave, Celes said suddenly. Together. Karen turned to her in surprise. Leave? To go where? We need to intercept both groups before they reach Nereus, she explained. My ship has room for two. We can meet them in space, explain the situation, prevent misunderstandings. You want me to leave my station, go back to civilization? Karen shook his head. I came here to get away from all that. Celes placed her blue hand on his arm. I know why you hide here, Karen. You feel guilty about your past, but right now you may be the only human who can prevent a disaster. Her silver eyes locked with his. You understand, my people. You understand the precursor technology. Both our species need you. They need a diplomat. I'm just an engineer, Karen argued. No, Celes said firmly. You're the person who helped an alien when she crashed instead of shooting her. You're exactly what both our species need right now. Karen looked around his small station. For 5 years, this had been his escape, his punishment for past mistakes. Now Celes was offering him a chance to do something important again. Why do you even want me to come? He asked. You could just leave, make your report. Celes looked down for a moment, then back up at him. The tactical reason is that you know things I don't. Your knowledge is valuable. She paused. But the true reason, I don't want to leave without you. The monitors beeped again. More ships were entering the system. We don't have much time, she said. What's your choice, Karen? Stay here alone, or come with me and help make history. Karen looked at the ocean, at the growing lights below the surface, then back at Celes. He took a deep breath. Let's finish fixing your ship. Water rushed into the control chamber. The Vexhar leader shouted something and ran for the exit, leaving Karen alone with the injured Celes. Can you walk? Karen asked, helping her to her feet. Celes nodded weakly. We need to hurry. The facility will seal itself completely in 15 minutes. Karen supported her weight as they made their way through corridors that were quickly filling with water. The precursor station's lights flashed red, and a low alarm sound echoed everywhere. Twice they had to swim through flooded sections, Karen pulling Celes along when her strength failed. They finally reached the exit, but Celes collapsed just as they got outside. Her blue skin had turned pale, and the wound on her shoulder was bleeding badly. Just leave me, she whispered. Save yourself. Not happening, Karen said firmly. He lifted her in his arms and swam toward the surface, using all his strength to fight the current. By the time they reached Celes's ship, she was unconscious. Kieran flew back to his research station, carrying her inside to his medical equipment. Her breathing was shallow, her pulse weak. Don't you dare die on me, he said as he connected her to his life support systems. He had modified them to work with her alien biology during her first recovery. For 3 days, Karen barely slept. He monitored Celes constantly, adjusting medications and checking her vital signs. When not at her bedside, he studied the data they had downloaded from the precursor facility before the lockdown. The information was fascinating and terrifying. The precursors hadn't built the containment system to protect against an outside enemy. They had built it to contain something from their own civilization, a technological creation that had evolved beyond their control. On the morning of the 4th day, Celes finally opened her silver eyes. "You saved me," she said, her voice barely audible. "You saved me first," Kieran replied with a smile. "How do you feel?" "Like I was shot and nearly drowned," she said, attempting a weak laugh. "Did the lockdown work?" Kieran nodded. "The underwater facility is completely sealed. Nothing can get in or out now." He showed her his screen. "But I've been studying what we found. Celes, the divergence wasn't an enemy species. It was the precursor's own technology that turned against them." Celes looked troubled. "I need to tell you something, Kieran." She paused, gathering strength. "Some groups in my civilization have been studying recovered precursor artifacts for years. They're trying to recreate their technology. That's why you were sent here," Kieran realized. "To find more precursor tech." She nodded slowly. "My mission was to assess whether this planet had technology that could help my faction win our internal conflict." Her eyes met his. "But now I understand why the precursors locked it away. It's too dangerous for anyone to control." Before Kieran could respond, his communication system beeped. Both human and Letherian ships had arrived in the system and established positions on opposite sides of Nereus. They were sending messages to each other, cautious and suspicious. "They don't trust each other," Kieran said, watching the communication patterns. "And the Vexhar are still out there, looking for opportunities." "We need to talk to them," Celes said, trying to sit up despite her injury. "Explain what we found. What's at stake?" "That's why you wanted me to come with you," Kieran said, "not just for my technical knowledge, but as someone who could speak to both sides." Celes reached for his hand. "Yes, you understand both worlds now. You can help prevent a conflict none of us can afford." Kieran looked at the screen showing the standoff in space, then back at Celes. He had spent years hiding from responsibility. Now he was facing the biggest one imaginable, helping two species avoid war while keeping dangerous technology out of everyone's hands. "I'll need to use my old military credentials," he said finally. "Set up a meeting." "Will they listen to you?" Celes asked. "They'll have to," Kieran replied, "because what we found changes everything." The next morning, Kieran's sensors beeped loudly, waking him from sleep. He rushed to the control room where Celes was already looking at the screens. "Something big is moving deep in the ocean," she said, pointing to the blinking dots. "And it wasn't there before." Kieran checked the readings. 5 kilometers down. Nothing lives that deep here. He zoomed in on the image. "It's too regular to be natural. Those are straight lines." They watched as the shape grew larger on the screen, rising slowly from the ocean floor. "We need to see it," Kieran decided, grabbing his gear. "The research sub can go that deep." 2 hours later, they descended through layers of increasingly dark water. Kieran's submarine lights cut through the blackness, revealing strange fish that scattered at their approach. "There," Celes pointed through the viewport. A massive structure was emerging from the seafloor, pushing aside centuries of sand and rock. It was made of black metal with glowing blue lines running across its surface. Parts of it looked like they were moving, rearranging themselves. "It's a building," Kieran whispered. "But who would build something this deep?" "The precursors," Celes said quietly. "We have stories about them. An ancient race that disappeared long ago." As they watched, an opening appeared in the side of the structure. Kieran guided the submarine closer. "This is a bad idea," Celes warned, but she didn't stop him. Inside, they found a large chamber with strange machines. Lights activated as they entered, illuminating symbols similar to those on Celes's ship. "You can read this?" Kieran asked, pointing to the wall panels. "Some of it," she replied, studying the symbols. This was a monitoring station. It watched this sector of space for something. She moved to another panel. "It's been sleeping for thousands of years. Until your ship crashed," Kieran realized. "The energy from your ship must have woken it up." Celes touched a screen, and it came to life. Images flashed across it, maps of stars, diagrams of planets, and what looked like weapons. She stepped back suddenly. "We need to leave. Now," she said urgently. "What is it?" Kieran asked. "This station is part of a defense network. It thinks it's under attack." She grabbed his arm. "It's activating security measures." They rushed back to the submarine. As they exited the structure, small objects detached from its sides and began moving toward them. "Drones," Sully said. "They'll try to stop us." Kieran pushed the submarine's engines to maximum speed, racing toward the surface. The drones followed, gaining on them quickly. "They're going to catch us," he said, watching the radar. Sully's moved to the back of the submarine. From her belt, she pulled out a small device that expanded into a weapon. "Open the rear hatch when I tell you." "That will flood the sub," Kieran protested. "Trust me," she said, her silver eyes intense. When the drones were almost upon them, Sully's nodded. Kieran hit the emergency hatch release and water rushed in. Sully stepped into the flooding chamber and fired her weapon. A blast of energy shot out, destroying 3 drones instantly. She fired again and again as water rose around her. Kieran sealed the hatch once she returned, soaking wet but alive. "You're not just a scout, are you?" he asked. Sully's looked away. "No, I'm Special Forces, sent to find precursor technology." She turned back to him. "The stories said this planet might have it. Now we know they were right." Back at the research station, they watched the monitors in silence. The station deep below was now fully active, sending a powerful signal into space. "What's it doing?" Kieran asked. "Calling for help," Sully's answered grimly. "Or warning others. Either way, something very old and very dangerous now knows we're here."